Hello, welcome back to What Problem Are You Solving? The greatest innovation podcast you've seen all week. We are back with an extra guest. This is fascinating. I don't know, you may have heard of our special guest, but we'll get to him in a minute. Let's jump right to our icebreaker of the week. Ty, what problem are you solving this week?
I'm solving the kids coming home from college problem. So the youngest one, I pick him up tomorrow. He starts his internship on the 15th. The oldest one, he's not coming home, but he gets to go to Korea for 3 weeks to study esports. And then we get to move his behind to Maine. Actually, he's driving himself up to Maine, and he gets to work funny enough, David, a AI company using AI to help with esports coaching and all the rest of that stuff. Really, really fascinating. It's a startup, but they're really successful. So it's a good problem I'm solving. Oh, and I start my new job on the 5th. Yes. Finally.
You're crushing it. All right.
I'm off the bench. So good stuff today.
Adam, what problem are you solving this week?
We'll see.
All right. So the riskiest assumption I was testing is if this earbud was going to work after my dog ate it. It did not.
Oh,
so that
experiment failed.
Super annoying. And as much as when we have guests on, we're only supposed to limit it to one. When we have no guests, I'm allowed to ramble. But when we have guests, we usually limit to one. But I have one assumption and one problem. All right. So the problem I'm trying to solve, this one was all dressed up and ready to go. I don't know what meme. So it's either the Matt Damon and Jimmy Kimmel, because we kept talking about David every week. Well, he was going to be on next week, that we kept bumping him. Or if you've seen exactly. So I don't know if we use the Jimmy Kimmel Matt Damon feud, or if you've seen What's Up With That on Saturday Night Live, where he's where David was Lindsey Buckingham. So I'm a little torn.
We just ran out of time. We'll see you next week, David. We'll get to you.
So I'm a little torn between my memes of we can have some fun with some of the AIs, either Lindsey Buckingham or Matt Damon. That's the normally I'll do some customer discovery themed, but today we had to. It's memes, only memes.
Yep.
Oh, and my book. I left it up in my attic loft thingamajig. So only 3 out of 4. Only 3 out of 4 books. Yeah, there we go.
Oh,
Here you go. In post production, John. I expect this to.
We'll edit it with AI. Let's see. As for me, the problem I'm solving is Ubering 5 kids around to different extracurricular activities while getting ready to go travel again for work. So it's all the busy work, so that leads up to travel for work. So it's always chaos. There's always something to do. So it's just balancing life and work and life.
Is Ubering the Kleenex brand version, or are you actually taking Ubers around?
No, but I was literally having this conversation today with my niece. I said, there wouldn't it be nice if there were a system like Uber, but for like kids in the neighborhood? Because we have a close neighborhood and little suburbs here. And what if there were a trusted parent that we could just call at any time and said, "Hey, can you pick up little Jane from her soccer game and take her over to little Sally's field hockey game?" I'd pay for that service.
I think there's a legit. When we talk about what problem you're solving, I've actually thought about that. Like
because Uber has a teen account, but I'm not ready for that yet. So.
No, and a lot of people are not. Yes,
not a stranger, but maybe someone in the neighborhood.
Hey, you guys both know Hugh. You both know Hugh Malozzi, right? Both Adam and David. He actually did. He actually did this for a while.
Well, there you
what
go.
was it called? He actually had a service for a while. He was doing exactly this. I don't know if it's still functioning, but he and I talked about it because I was like the same thing. Like, ooh, this is kind of cool. So Hugh actually tried this in San Francisco.
I'd love to hear what his experiments came up with.
Yeah.
Speaking of experiments,
he's a good guy.
Let's talk with the world-renowned, esteemed author of Testing Business Ideas, David Bland. Welcome to the show. Great to see you. Great to have you. So obviously, we were fangirling before the show to have you on. But in all seriousness, we appreciate the work that you've done to add to the knowledge repository of all that is, good startup engineering. So, David, what problem are you solving this week? Personal, professional, or else?
Personal. It's been trying to train 2 puppies, which has been interesting. 5 months old, but they're rescues, and my wife has got this more under control than I do, where it's like we're going to cordon off a portion of our house and start there. Luckily, we have tile floors. And professionally, I think it's been this really interesting take on, how we always talk, people are like, do they have the problem? Are they aware of the problem? Are they actively seeking solution to the problem? I've been really trying to work on people who aren't aware and like, what are the symptoms? So I've been trying to solve that problem. Like, how do you diagnose and help them become aware? So that might be something we could talk about, but we can talk about whatever. But that's what I've been working on.
That's deep, because then that is kind of the next level of consulting, right? Because it's very easy to fly in and help them with a specific problem, but if they don't know they have the problem, how can you help, right? How can you help best?
You know what that reminds me of is because I use this all the time about somebody who was really expert at understanding that people watching through observations that people aren't aware of a problem. The Jobs movie with because I read Isaacson's book, Jobs, and I also I thought the movie was fascinating. It just truncated the big book. When the Ashton Kutcher, when he played that, when he first gets back to Cupertino and he's sitting there and he's flopping the disc, sitting it out of the disc player, and he looks around at other people and he's like, holy crap, they're doing the same thing I'm doing. And all of a sudden, the next scene is he has like the iPhone, check it out, this is what I have, or the iPod or whatever. That's the immediate association I had with what you said about, because I think that you're onto something. I really do. So I'd love to explore that today.
Cool. So last week we talked about, what are assumptions and that kind of thing. But why don't you, David, give us a little rehash of what are assumptions? Why should we test them? Why should we care about the riskiest ones, right? What's your elevator pitch when you go into a workshop about how to help people test their assumptions?
And what are people the worst at?
Exactly. Where's the most resistance?
We started that last week, so that was the one thing I wanted to sneak in. Like, we all know that the resistance to customer discovery, but are they bad? Do they not know that they're even making an assumption? Are they bad at formulating it? Are they bad at figuring out the right test? Which we can. Everyone hold up. That problem to solve. Come on. There we go. All right, what are they the worst at?
Oh, well, first assumption, it's like a belief, right? It's just a belief we have that isn't really supported by facts, or we don't know yet. It's just like a belief. And then I always get into this, and I've been trying to simplify since the release of the book too, because I feel like it's really easy to make that book even more complicated and even more complicated. And I've been really trying to simplify. And so, but you think about like, what's the difference between an assumption and a hypothesis? And what we use in the book is a hypothesis is something that's testable, precise, and discrete. So it can be tested, like it can be, proven or disproven, or supported or refuted, or validated or invalidated, whatever language you want to use. And then precise in that it is like describing a precise thing, like it's not a bunch of ambiguous words. It is, precise. And then discrete being it doesn't have a bunch of ands in it. I always look for the word and. So if your big assumption is like, oh, I have this and this and this and this and this, and then I'm going to run one giant test to test all of that at once. That is sort of human nature, I've found. Or I'm going to run like one test to test a bunch of assumptions all at once. I see that theme in the teams I coach. And so some of my companies I coach right now, we still do the refining from assumption to hypothesis, and we'll take what we've mapped out and we say, hey, this is the riskiest assumption, but is this testable? And what I've found over time is like the teams that really get this and have worked at this for a while, they're pretty good at writing their assumptions. They're not writing anything that's unimportant. They're writing things that are really critical. They're writing them very well worded. They're not putting a bunch of ands in there. And refining them seems kind of overkill. And then I'll go into another team where their assumption will be like, people will buy it. And then I'm like, okay, like Socrates hat on, like let's start with we believe, or I believe, and then who's we, and what's your product, and for how much, and I kind of coach them into something specific that we can test. So I feel like we've been talking about this stuff for almost 10, 15 years now. And there are some people that have taken it and ran with it, and they're really like well equipped to write these things the first time. And then some folks that are new to it, they need a lot more help and in that refining process.
All right. So how do you go from assumption to test versus assumption to wrong assumption? So the example you gave was perfect. Like, they will buy it. Sure. So like, I find myself in the same position all the time. Who is we? How much? By when? How many? And we talked about this all last week as our warm-up show. Like this, we believe this many people will buy this, this persona will buy this much for this price for this reason. Even if you want to get into the hypothesis piece, the explanation is really the key. So how much I used to find that they didn't know what their riskiest assumption was until they got all the way to designing and even running the wrong experiment. Like, how much do you allow people to run the wrong experiment even? There's no necessarily wrong, but what probably is the wrong experiment on a non-risky assumption? Are you trying to limit the distance and the exposure to get them to see like there's 20 other embedded assumptions, or what's your strategy there?
Yeah, I still do mapping, a lot of assumptions mapping where there's all kinds of different versions of assumptions mapping. I think what makes mine unique is that I have the desirable, viable, feasible themes included in it. And that was my, I guess, big contribution to the 2x2, which is desirable is kind of do they, viable is kind of should we, and feasible is kind of can we. And so what I realized, if you're going with a founder, maybe it's a technical founder and they're not really comfortable with desirability and viability, and they can only talk about feasibility, where you're going to see a bunch of blue stickies, a bunch of feasibility assumptions. Whereas if you have a cross-functional team, and this is why I like working with cross-functional teams, it does make my life a lot harder. I feel like I would simplify my life as a consultant if I just said, I just work with one capability or one function and that's it. Like the rest of you can figure it out for yourselves. But I don't. I make it really hard on myself because I want to see impact, and I have cross-functional teams. With cross-functional teams, you get product design, engineering, marketing, research, legal. It doesn't have to be this giant team, but you do get the perspectives of all these different themes. And what I find is just, it's kind of like tricking people to talk to each other and prioritize together and say, okay, yeah, obviously like building it is going to be risky, but if people don't want it or there's no job to be done, that's going to kill it, regardless if we can build it or not. So I do find there's some elements of getting people to collaborate with it that make it a bit easier versus if you're just trying to help one person, they have blind spots. We all have them. It's really hard. Unless you have, this is why I've been using GPT a bit to just like spot the blind spots and just give you a draft of assumptions if you're not aware of them. But it's really tough, I think, if you're doing this by yourself.
I used to be, and these guys know this, I used to be a long time ago, literally this November, it'll be 40 years ago that I used to be a police officer, right? I was 18 years old and they gave me a gun, a badge, and handcuffs, and they said, go for it. I'm like, yeah, okay. But one of the things that they taught us in accident investigation is that when you get to an accident and you find the 3 or 4 people that saw the accident, you ask them to go to separate parts of the scene and not talk to one another. Because then what you go and do is you go and you create this story. You get, oh, so what did you see? Well, I saw this. And so what did you see? And what I saw, what did you see? So you end up with this hologram of the actual incident. And the piece that I like about what you just said is by having these cross-functional teams, even if it's, oh, by the way, if you saw John and I doing this about end, where we first started working together, we would get these scientists, because we worked in a highly technical organization, get these scientists that would have these hypotheses like, we want to do this and this and this and this. And John, of the 3 of us, the real engineer of the 3 of us, would say, yeah, okay, you do all that. Which one made something happen? If something changed, how do you know?
Right. If you change all the ingredients in the cake and the cake turns out bad, which piece did it? Yeah. It drove me crazy.
And so what I like about having this really sophisticated yet simple, and I've gone to the contrast, I think is important. The sophistication is that you have multiple people from different perspectives talking about, can we do it? Should we do it? And can we afford it? right? The feasible, viable, desirable. It doesn't seem that hard, but it is really sophisticated. But if you try one thing, one accident that we're looking at, just one, that you actually can get some really emergent themes that otherwise you couldn't uncover, which I think is the power of ChatGPT and all of this. That's just the part that popped in my head as you were saying that, David. So,
Yeah, and so you could, and I've tried this before early in my career, separate those folks and do it without the cross functionality in the room, but do it, let's say let's work with design first and product and engineering, and let's like split them out and then try to synthesize a map. But eventually, you still have to do those trade-offs and compromise, because what will happen is, and I made this mistake in my career early on. I did a design offsite for this giant corporation in Seattle, and we had all these amazing assumptions around desirability, but we had a really hard time comparing those to the other themes. Like, yeah, these were the world of this is really risky for the people in the room, but without knowing where it relates to, will people pay enough? How much does it cost? And can we build it? We didn't know if those were risky in the overall scheme of things, or if they're risky just from a desirability point of view.
Right. Or, the hippo in the room, right? It's risky to who, right? So that's always been a tough prioritization exercise, right? Because if we ask teams to prioritize, well, they might prioritize something higher or riskier than their boss, for example, right? So who do you make happy? All of them, right? How do you balance that, right?
Well, also known and unknown is also relative to who knows it and doesn't, and how recent the evidence is, and is it secondary evidence? Did that team run that exact experiment and that's how they know, or do they know because they think, because they think they know, do they really know? I think both of those matrices, both of those
axes
are equally important and equally tricky. All right, I feel like desirability and viability gets conflated with exactly that. The how much will they pay, and will they pay, and who? Do we want to spend time, or we can come back to the end? I mean, I feel like feasibility risk is going to zero, which always has been the trend for a while with lean startup, and now with AI. We don't have to just get into AI, but I feel like, we used to talk about, cancer drugs and, space shuttles, and even those have made progress in the last 5 years and will make even more with AI. Is feasibility risk going to zero for most cases? And then is it just desire, because with the classic startup, it's always like desirability. Like, I always just want to start with desirability risk, but then I know we had Ash on the show, like the Fermi estimates and running at least some back, and like, will this business ever work? A lot of mentors, who don't like it when I just go desirability first. So, but I feel like we can kind of throw feasibility out and then sort of balance desirability with viability, or at least the payment side, the revenue side of viability. I feel like cost goes into feasibility, and eventually you can bring it down, or you can make the business work if you have enough demand. I don't know. How do you see
does
those?
some of that get conflated? But some of that get conflated with, because I heard you say about startups, and David, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Get conflated with very early people versus more mature organizations that you may be jumping in, that are in their next iteration of wherever their business is, that you're going back in and you're like, hey, listen, you're not new anymore. You have a few dollars in the pocket, and now you have to start to shift and have some more maturity, which may mean that instead of desirability being like, does anybody want it, which where I spend most of my time, at least with my students in very early startups. Like, I had a student the other day, literally on the phone, like, I got this idea, I got this pen, and the people would enter to help people do it. He was like, people want to be safe, right? I literally had to talk him off the ledge. I got this idea in the pen, and if you get attacked and you can show it, look, I have a pen, and if you don't keep following me, I'm gonna poke you with my pen, and I'm gonna hit this clicker, and the police are gonna come. I'm like, dude, they got a phone. People know how to not go into bad areas. What are you talking about? And he was like, oh, yeah, I got to back up. And so the idea of this kid with just an idea versus maybe whoever you're working with in Seattle, right? Understanding where they're at and getting them to think through it. I'm just wondering, do you think that there is, to follow on to Adam's hypothesis, notwithstanding, no pun intended, but that there is a little bit there that you want to focus on depending on the maturity of the organization that you're working with?
Yeah, it's kind of like meeting people where they are or half step ahead, maybe. You think about, well, we mentioned cancer research. I've actually worked with pharmaceutical companies during the pandemic, and I was working with a cancer research team. And a lot of the feasibility risk there was like regulatory stuff because they were trying to go into different regions around the world, and different regions, different governments and different policies, and they couldn't just clone what worked in one country and just roll it out across the world. So it's interesting. We've been doing this for so long. It's really hard to point to an industry where, just applying kind of like scientific method to business hasn't been at least tried now, at least, through my coaching. And so it's really hard to say like, it won't work here because it's like, well, it won't work for cancer research. And I've literally worked with cancer research companies. But I think when it comes to the ideas part, I almost Trojan horsed, I guess, this thinking with the book title, because I think the backlash, I don't get a lot of backlash on the book, other than the pages falling out, which they used the wrong glue, all the pages fell out. I'd put 1 star too if all the pages fell out. The backlash is sort of like from some of the discovery community going and the research community saying like, well, you're trying just to test ideas, so you're leading with the ideas. If you look at like all my work, it's more about, well, what are the assumptions you're making, what are the jobs to be done, willingness to pay, all that. So I wish I could have maybe been more upfront with how I approach things and just be more clear. But I think what happens in reality is people already have ideas, just like you were saying, Ty. And then you almost have to back them up a bit and say, what are the big assumptions in your ideas? And back to Adam's point, it's a lot of desirable, viable risk early on. It's not, can you build it, unless you're trying to like time travel. It's a lot of who is that person with the problem, and like the title of this show, right? And is it meaningful, and is it urgent, and is there any evidence they're trying to solve it, or they're even aware of it? And it's so I realize in my coaching and consulting, especially like the last 5 years, I don't do much around feasibility whatsoever. I might bring up some feasibility risk and say, hey, we got to check in with FDA approval or right to practice or IP or something like that. But I'm not spending most of my time there. Almost all my time's in desirable, viable, because that's where things fail. People work on this stuff for years in a vacuum, customer free zone, and then they haven't really talked to customers much, or they haven't figured out what they would pay or any evidence whatsoever. And that's where it gets really risky, because now you've invested all this in feasibility and neglected desirable, viable. So I still like that framing, desirable, viable, feasible. But I would say most of my time lately has been on desirability and viability, because I'm in these early stage ideas, and that's where I feel like all the risk is.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. Shifting gears a little bit, I know there's another thing that is full of assumptions, and that's another one of our favorite topics, is strategy, right? Where strategy should be, your North Star, your set of choices that gets you to some ultimate desired outcome. And yet, it still seems, even in 2025, that most companies do it wrong. Ty and I are it's no secret that we're fans of the Playing to Win strategy by Roger Martin and Lafley, as well as Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Rumelt. And, we still
don't forget Blue Ocean.
And Blue Ocean. Can't forget Blue Ocean.
That's right.
Because, there are people that they'll do this thing on like ivory tower planning, and there's a whole conversation about strategic thinking versus strategic planning. But yet, what I think you've come to talk about too is how strategies themselves are assumptions that need to be tested and should be tested early and often. So, what's the thinking on that?
It's sort of a thorn in my side at the moment. And speaking of Blue Ocean strategy, I saw Citizen M got acquired today by Marriott, and they were a case study, or at least Alex used them as a case study, as how to use Blue Ocean strategy, like 4 actions framework on a hotel industry. So that was interesting. I think there are a couple of things we could dive into. One is strat planning, which I still think it's an oxymoron. Maybe you all can talk
Yes,
me off that
100%.
ledge.
Thank you. You're in
I
good
like
company.
Martin's series of integrated choices. You know,
Yes.
it's a series of integrated choices, and I think where I focus in that is like, well, aren't there also experiments there? And I don't really know if he's a fan of my work. I think he might be, and then sometimes I think he might not be, because I don't know him personally, so I don't want to speak on his behalf. But I'm a fan. I like the way he thinks about things. But I also think he has a point sometimes when he says, you all are trying to use scientific method to prove something that isn't provable. And so I often question my life choices when he says that, career choices, because I'm like, is that what I'm really doing? I'm trying to prove that it's unprovable. But with regards to strategy, I think
That's called
crazy,
philosophy.
it's crazy to me. It's crazy to me that we have spent how long has the Agile community been around? At least since like late 90s,
Oh,
2000s when it started taking off. I think I spoke at my first Agile conference like 2010 maybe, and people get like how to deliver in a iterative manner. Like the teams, this is not a problem anymore. And I think the challenge what we're seeing is like it's only viewed as delivery. It's not viewed as thinking anymore. It's
How
viewed
fast
as
can you get things out the door? Not
Yeah.
is it valuable? Is it desired, viable, etc.
no. And then with lean, I think lean is like, well, lean means cheap. So we can do it in a cheap way. And I know they're different, like sort of, I don't want to get into like methodology wars or anything here.
Sure.
But like with lean, there are different, areas of thinking with lean. But I think the way it's been interpreted by companies is like, oh, it's cheap. So we take lean and agile, we go cheap and fast. And then we take this strategy process and we just sort of like waterfall it down to the teams. And then they like iterate through it. And it's almost like all the decisions have been made upstream. And the teams are left with, okay, I'm going to iterate through this, but really how empowered am I to iterate and change anything? Because it feels like a very, it feels very disconnected to me. It's not just one company.
One way direction, right? Top down ivory tower planning. David, if you were king for a day and you saw a company that had this waterfall strategy and an agile mindset, how would you come in? What doors would you kick in and start to clean house? How would you fix it?
Yeah, well, they're not all doomed. I mean, I've been invited into a lot of C-level conversations about this and board level recently. It's about, I think if the team looks at something like assumptions mapping, they're like, okay, I can try to do this at the level that I can influence. But when you go up higher in the org, almost even at the board level or C-level, they almost don't even consider that as a practice, right? So think about looking at your strategy and saying, what kind of risk do we have in our strategy? And can we just own up to the fact that we don't have a lot of evidence in some of this? And can we design tests to go figure it out? I don't think it has to be any more complicated than that. But I think the way they're trying to solve that is maybe through OKRs and maybe through other methods. But it still feels like things are cascading down to the teams in a way where they iterate through it. And I could be mistaken, but with my observations, it feels as if I could just come into a company where they're putting this strategy together and literally just raise my hand and say, okay, what kind of big assumptions are we making in our strategy? And can we just be open and upfront to those? And then can we design at least some sort of series of experiments? I mean, it might change, but at least we're making space to run those versus assuming that the teams are going to iterate through this when the teams don't feel empowered to really question the strategy or bring up things that contradict it.
So when John and I were working strategy, and again, I'm the guy that kind of brought this notion, at least for the small team that we were on, about strategy and thinking about Martin's 5 questions or Blue Ocean. I think there's evidence that I was the first person to introduce Blue Ocean strategy into the federal DoD system. Some evidence, or at least nobody else documented it. But one of the things that, to your point, when the first time I tried to introduce these 5 questions to one key component area of this very large intelligence organization, the director was like, we ain't ready for that. I'm like, you ain't ready to answer a question like what's important, what winning look like? No. John has evidence that when I introduced it to him, he was like, oh yeah, they came to him and said, John, we need to figure out what we're going to do with our 70 new engineers. And he's like, well, what you going to do with 7? I don't know. But we now have 70, which is question number 5. We have resources. They never considered what the assumption is on winning. What does winning look like? When we would talk about it, and I would, while I hear you that Roger may not be your best ally, he may love you, may hate you at the same time. That second and third order question in the cascade is what we find the heart, where John and I would go to the teams that we work with, is like, where do you play and how do you win? And what kind of tests do you need to do iteratively to figure out whether or not your assumption that you stated up front works before you even start talking about resources and management structures and all that rest of that crap. Don't do that, because now you've gotten to Mitzenberg's strategic thinking versus strategic planning. And I do think the strategic planning is an oxymoron. It is agile. It in the government, John, what do we call that? The PBB, where the program budget planning cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're gonna do 5 years worth of planning. Okay, you don't know what you're gonna do tomorrow, but you got 5 years. Yeah, well, we have to, because we have to target money, and we're going to backtrack money based on what we said we were going to do 3 years ago to figure out what we're going to do 2 years into the future. What? But yet, David, they won't go and talk to people. They won't go and test their, like, where do we play and how are we creating value? Because they don't understand that. Value is like a foreign word to them.
Yeah.
And one of the things John and I would always foot stomp is like, well, Ty, we don't sell anything. Of course you don't, but people give you money to do stuff, and there's a mission associated with that money.
Yeah.
Do you think you may want to see that as valuable and test that and see whether or not you're doing the right thing?
Do you see any pushback from nonprofits when you meet with them? Do they struggle differently?
I feel like it's more of a tooling thing sometimes with nonprofits. I just did a talk last week with some associations, and then at Prodacity in Nashville, I gave a keynote on the mission model canvas and just how you test. Because basically what I do, and this has been my work with the IMF and other nonprofits around the world, I take that kind of like desirable, viable, feasible overlay that we did on the business model canvas, and I do the same thing on the mission model canvas. It works still pretty well. You know, you're talking about beneficiaries instead of customers. You're talking about impact instead of revenue. You're talking, you know, but overall,
those terms seem to be abstract in our experience when we try to have those conversations of, okay, we know you're not making dollars on this, but how are you measuring impact? What do you mean? What's impact? Like, okay, how are you generating the value based off of the tax dollars that you're spending? Well, say more, you know. And so we found that to be a harder bridge to cross for some of these people who haven't, done private industry or anything like that before.
Yeah, but even in nonprofits or agency or mission driven, I mean, you still have to show, in my opinion anyway, and you can obviously argue this point with me, but I think you have to show impact or show results for the budget, or you're probably not going to get as much budget next time around. And I wonder,
or you get promoted,
or you it is, and this is maybe a roundabout question for Adam in a way, with even startups eventually, is funding driving all this dysfunction? Is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing the way we fund things derive all this behavior? Because if you're trying to create a 5-year plan, or you're trying to spend enough money this year or all of it so that you get as much or more next year, is that disincentivizing teams to test or even talk about assumptions? I often wonder about this.
You fight harder when you're hungry. I'll put it that way.
I mean, it's funny because it's a startup question. I was like excited to answer the startup question. The budget, I still remember when someone admitted to me, when I think it was a nonprofit. It was like one of the first, not at the C-level meetings you're at, but I remember being at with the board, and they were just, yeah, we don't want to test anything. We just want to spend, if we don't spend this money, we're not getting it next year. So yes to the corporate, and yes to both, but for different reasons. So startups have no incentive to really de-risk. They have incentive to pitch and not pretend, but justify that they have a big market size, because that's what investors are looking for. That's it. And that's been sort of pushed down through the all the way through accelerators to universities. And yeah, that's it. And I wish we could build it back up. Starting with these customer discovery programs and some of the accelerators. Yeah. But yes, on the corporate and nonprofit side, 100%. And especially on the government side, these guys have seen it themselves. I mean, it's not a cliche. I mean, some of the most innovative people I've ever worked with were in the government side. On the other hand, some of those cliches about budget cycles are also true. Where it's just like, we just have to spend this money to get it next quarter. That's the riskiest assumption, unfortunately, and it's true.
So, David, we actually worked. John and I worked in an organization that had a director who took over. What was it, John? 3 days before 9/11 or something like that. Clapper jumped in. Yeah, 3 days before 9/11, he took over the agency. And we have it on good authority, because I wasn't around then, and I don't think John was around quite at the beginning of his tenure, but we have it on good information that he said something to the effect, I wish we had an emergency at all times, a crisis, because people know how to behave and how to act. And I think the question that you're asking, a colleague of mine wrote a book or an article in a book about post-bureaucratic organizations. And I think that what you're asking is, and I wrote this down, is austerity at the edge of dysfunction. And so when you have less, you know what to do, right? You can figure it out. It's like, I know I can get inventive if I have less. Now, I'm not talking, this is not a political commentary, but I'm not talking Doge cuts, right? I'm talking like, I don't have what I used to have. How do I continue on and create innovative value, particularly on the mission side, when I don't have enough? I have enough to keep it going, but I don't have enough to like sit back and go, well, I don't have to listen to anybody because we're good to go and we just keep making money, right? And you're not at the Kodak moment. You're at a Fuji moment, right? Where Fuji was like, we got to get out of this. This is a zero-end game on wet film. We ain't doing this no more. And I just, that's just what came to my head as you were writing that. You were talking about, like, to Adam and asking Adam about it. And of course, I go my internet.
I'll jump in.
I think I got the gist of what you're saying.
He was on a roll.
Yeah, is it crazy to say that if you follow these methods, you're less likely to get big funding? Like, It's almost like you've done the work to find your early adopters and the size, some market sizing, and you've got some traction. But now it's not just a dream on a PowerPoint slide of how big your market size is with no evidence. I think about, I mentioned this, I was on Tamara's podcast. It isn't out yet, but a couple weeks ago. And it's almost like when you watch the show Silicon Valley, there's just a scene where he's like, you're a pure play, you're pre-revenue, don't show. I was like, I can't watch this show anymore. I really can't watch. Like, it
hurts. Yeah.
Like, is this why people don't want to do this kind of work? Because the upside seems smaller and therefore people will pass on them, either in the corporate setting or in startups?
Related to that, you talk about mission model canvas, right? Where instead of customer relationships, you replace that with buy-in. And so we would teach that as your political box, right? And so how do you grow capital, or to tie it back to your point, like, how do you manage and experiment on hype, right? Because that sells, right? That's how you get, VC funding. It is not necessarily, it'd be great if you had data, but sometimes it's just on, a wish and a hope. So yeah, maybe you have to manage that as an experiment as well, right? That is part of the work of an entrepreneur, is to sell the idea as well, and it needs to be managed accordingly.
It's also I think you're starting finally after 20 years to see differentiation in VC, where it's not just a check where they're having to prove value. And I do think at some point, I've been hoping someone else, I was kind of hoping David did this for 20 years. Like, at some point, dare I say, like, private equity better than VC, but at some point, if someone's able to prove that they are actually de-risking that that it's no longer theater and that the emperor kind of has no clothes. And the second someone's able to prove with data, then all of these like private equity, arbitrage kind of hedge funds come in. It's like, okay, now we have the hack and we can actually run. Like I thought, Bill Gross or someone like that would run one of these idea labs or assumption labs or customer discovery labs and prove with data that that was their thesis. It wasn't necessarily vertical. It wasn't stage. It wasn't portfolio. It was process. And I do think one of these VC funds is sort of going to prove that they're able to de-risk that piece. That, yes, I think it is true now, for sure. I don't know why. Probably just because, probably like you said, partially because, the dream is better than reality, and that's what people want. They want to make that pure play bet and prove that they're visionaries and all that stuff. But I do think at some point someone's going to come in and prove if they can prove that it works, it's gonna flip.
David, are you doing any work with venture studios at this point and how they work?
I've talked to a few. I'm a fan of just the model. Like back at Neo, we were trying to do something like that, but it wasn't quite. It was kind of a mix of all kinds of stuff because we were doing like lean startup as a service as a agency. But we had some ex-startup folks or people in between startups, and we were trying to circle around ideas and see problems in the market and build out. I don't think I wasn't there long enough before we got acquired to see it kind of bloom into a venture studio. I do talk to a lot of people that run studios though. And I also see what like Barry O'Reilly's doing with Nobody and some other things. He's doing more the private equity route. But I do see this more sort of applicable to that model, because if you're going to assemble a team around a problem and then prove out the traction enough that this should be a thing and we should invest in it, then the tranches make more sense, not giving all the money at once, just giving it in tranches and scaling up as you need it. So you might be onto something with that. Like maybe that's where the change starts to happen.
I think the meter, it never fully took on, but the product life cycle, I will plug that book as well. Like the metered funding that corporates do, I actually think is closer to what VC, they're all broken and dysfunctional, the corporates, but I actually do think if a fund or someone actually did do metered funding the way we tried to do it at Pearson, I feel like that model could work. I don't know. And the studio, with the studio model, I also, or even an agency model with cost coming, with feasibility risk going to zero, and just making better funding allocation bets. I think it could work.
Yeah, for those of you like,
well, it seems like this circles.
Go ahead.
No, it's just me. I was just saying that it seems to me like this circles back to your original problem that you're trying to solve, which is how do you work with people who have not yet seen that they have a problem, right? There's a piece of that this part of the conversation the last 4 or 5 minutes has been around. So we know what the VC model is: just throw a crap ton of money at it and see what happens, and see what spaghetti falls off the wall and see what sticks. Versus, they don't know they have a problem, but we're going to build a team around what the edges of what could be a problem. And to your point, Adam, we're going to fund this ever so slightly as more and more information comes out that says that this, the two intersecting curves of money and problem, they eat that intersection point. They're like, yep, we're onto something. And we haven't spent a crap ton of money to do it. We've just been patient and watched and use some of the stuff that you're talking about in terms of assumptions.
Which is also why I think it's a bit of an off topic, but funding, because feasibility risk is going so, and you can build anything, funding people like Bill Gross did originally to just work on idea, like that was to me the origin of a studio. I feel like, and especially a lot of these other kind of programs that are not necessarily supporting unicorns, but are trying to build small businesses or support the local ecosystems or underrepresented founders, I do think that there's a way of funding almost like like an entrepreneurial fellowship. I think Right to Start is I don't want to speak on their behalf. I think they're sort of doing stuff like that. But yeah, having like an entrepreneurial fellowship where you're paying entrepreneurs to live. Like it used to be the opposite. Like, how dare you spend money on I want you to prove it to me that you're willing to eat ramen and prove your idea. But I think the model is exactly flipped, where now you pay people a moderate wage to live, and then you can pay for the startup and the growth as data comes in. I mean, it just sounds so obvious, but I don't know.
And all the materials there. I mean, let's face it, we've
Right.
been building on this with, Eric Ries's work and Ash's work and my work. And it's not like we don't have enough information out there to say, okay, you're going to start, map out some of your assumptions. We're going to go off and test. You're going to bring back what you've learned. And then we're going to pivot, persevere, or pause this thing. And I think maybe the funding makes it more complicated if you do it in tranches. Maybe that's what's holding people back because of valuations and everything. But from a just investing in people point of view, it just feels as if, based on all our collective experience, that you're probably more likely to find something with base hit level funding where you're having a conversation, being mentored, and then either like pivoting in a direction that makes more sense, or persevering and getting more resources to get even more evidence and stronger evidence and go through viability and feasibility. It just feels like even if that idea didn't work out, you have trained that person and helped level them up to this extent where when they try something else, like they're going to find something that works. Like it's only a matter of time. And it's not I have a brilliant idea and I build it and launch it and see what happens. It's like that iteration of discovery and validation. We'll just be a stronger community of entrepreneurs for it.
Yeah, I've never wanted to bait and switch, but I always want to be like, all right, here's sort of like in Shark Tank, how it's like, I won't invest in risk capital and give you equity, but I'll fund your orders, like same thing with an AdWords campaign. I always want to be like, I'll give you $100,000 in AdWords, but show me your first ad, right? Like, show me what's broken. The numerator, the denominator. Are you getting 1 million impressions and no conversions? Are you getting conversions, but then people are not, and then you have a churn problem? Like, what's broken? And then I do think you would incentivize the right decision making. If they were somehow guaranteed the money, but there had to be that's sort of what a board should be doing. But then it's like they would have to justify, like, why are you spending more money on this when it's not working, kind of thing. I don't know. I do think that there's something to that.
So I have another question. Just yesterday, they invented this new technology called artificial intelligence. I don't know if you heard about it. It's kind of making waves. And you said you've been working on this stuff at least for testing business ideas, at least for the past 13 or so years. What changes in the landscape of testing business ideas or running experiments or assumptions testing have you seen? And I'll lead the witness a little bit to say that I've seen other frameworks try to wrap their arms around this AI monster by saying that there's how do you build AI technologies, which for the most part we would probably agree you still do your iterative agile way of building those things, especially at the speed of the rate of change of technology. The second facet is how do you use AI to enhance the coaching, the entrepreneur, the product manager, right? To upskill that person, to make the human more awesome while they're building. And then the third one is kind of like the ethical use of AI. So given those three facets, building AI, using AI to make humans superhuman, and then the ethical use of AI, where have you seen those categories pop up in your assumption testing?
Yeah, I think I was pretty resistant to it at first because I had this hunch that people would just want to talk to ChatGPT instead of customers, which is proving out to be true. But I remember running a workshop.
Validated.
I do a bunch of online workshops, and I went to a breakout room, and there was a team that had just, I gave them some instructions to work through something as a team, and they just pulled up ChatGPT and was just having it generate everything for them. And I was like, okay, I need to start getting up to speed on this more because my teams are just going to use it. And I'm a huge fan of the human in the loop, right? I want us to basically be able to walk through this and edit things and give our inputs into it, not just have it spit out a bunch of things. And so what I do is I just have like a series of prompts where we walk through what are your assumptions, so you feed an idea and a target and all that. And yeah, and I'm running a workshop on this tomorrow, coincidentally, which wasn't, I don't even know if we even planned this like this. It just happened to be this way. And so basically what I've seen that works is I see people get, it's almost like blank slate kind of syndrome or something, where blank page, where they don't know where to start with their assumptions. And so you can feed it. I have a series of prompts where I feed it based off the book where it'll generate some. Like it's good enough now that it'll generate some pretty good assumptions, like desirable, viable, feasible assumptions that would have to be true for this to work. And then I feed it prompts to say, okay, well, how important are these? And then how much evidence? And the evidence is the one thing I've seen kind of get better, because now it can scrape and find evidence online and actually explain its reasoning of why it ranked things a certain way. Wow. First time I did this, it wasn't able to do any of that. And then
do you use reasoning models when you do that? Do you actually start going and playing with the more complicated chain of thought type AI models, like to really have it scrape, put together things? Because it's costly, but it's fascinating what it can come up with.
I've been using deep research a bit more.
Yeah, perfect.
And now they just made a version of deep research that's like a lightweight version. It's free now in OpenAI, which I haven't played with yet. I'm using the plus version, but it's surprisingly good. And then have it spit out like a draft experiment plan for you. So basically you're editing it along the way, but you're able to say, okay, I can work through this and come out with a draft of, here are my riskiest assumptions and here are some tests I could go and run. And obviously you're going to have to go and change that and everything. But I feel like it just starts getting some momentum where people just freeze. And I think there's all kinds of reasons why people freeze. We don't want to be wrong. We don't want to talk about assumptions that maybe we're not even aware of. And I think it's just kind of like an extra team member in a way. Now, I don't say go and talk to it instead of customers. I'm not saying that you should just take it at its word and never question anything. But I do think the way I use it anyway, it's a better use of, instead of people just being froze and being stuck in a process, like to get them going. I find
it's your first step. Helpful. Yeah, I always like to think of it as my really smart intern, right? I'm going to bounce ideas off of, but I'm not going to take it to production, right? I'm not going to say this is the answer and trust it blindly. So yeah, well, I totally agree. I think it's a great approach, and that's what you teach in this workshop, right? That's what's you help teams go through that.
Yeah, this is the 4th or 5th workshop we've done of these, and the prompts have changed over time. And now I'm teaching a bit more of the deep research part of things, because now you could say, here's the other thing, Adam, I know we see here all the time. I don't know where to find the customers now that you told me to go interview. I have it create a detailed research plan of where to find all these customers, how to frame the questions, all that in like 10 minutes on deep research. It's ridiculous. So there's no other excuse you can use of, oh, I don't know where to find them and I can't just Google all day. Literally, you can just prompt deep research now and it'll create a pretty good plan of how to go find those people and like what conferences to go to and everything. Yeah.
And now there's, agents who will do it for you, who will reach out. So I agree. Yeah. I mean, well, no, there are sites. So there's a couple that will do synthetic interviews for you, which I agree. I don't want to editorialize, the value of that. But there's also, which I think is the happy medium, there are AI agents who will then just who will go find those people on LinkedIn or somewhere else and set up the interview. So you still have to run and do a human interview, but there are agents now that will not only help you think about where to find them, but will actually go out and find them and
set it up for you. That's
set up a calendar and then you can and we all believe in talking to people, live and in person, but they can also set up an automatic Zoom, which then would transcribe the interview. It could help you, no one's doing this yet, but it could also help guide you like, oh, nope, that's a leading, instead of afterwards where you're analyzing bad questions in real time, it could sort of put up a little, prompt box like, nope, you're leading, or don't forget to ask for examples. Hey, like it's going to go there in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, well, this hour has flown by, so I want to give everyone a chance to put some final thoughts together. I'll start with you, Ty. Final thoughts on tonight's topic, or anything you didn't ask David?
Yeah, my internet stinks. That's my final thought. David, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. Oh God, appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with us. I think that there are opportunities, or should be some more opportunities for us to talk about this idea, the impact of AI on the work that we're doing. So that's my thought.
Great, Adam. Final thoughts?
Who's doing it's easy to pick on people like why they don't listen to evidence, why they don't talk to customers, why they think their ideas are great. Who's doing the best job, whether a group of students or a corporate or an accelerator?
What customer segment does it the best?
Yeah. And as much detail as we have time for specific class, specific random workshop, and like that, we're just like, not only we're able, like you talked about in the beginning about this group being able to define their assumption, but who's really like understands, both humble, but then goes and finds the customers, applies the data, runs end to end, checks off the riskiest assumption, then actually goes to the next risky or uncovers new assumptions, and then really goes through the flywheel properly, and not I can't believe we didn't talk about the product death cycle I can't believe we didn't talk about that at all. But we'll still keep the Chiron David Bland next week for the next year, and then we'll bring him back hopefully in 6 months. Yeah, there we go. One team, one specific startup. You can plug some individual who has done it the best.
Ooh. Maybe I'm biased. I feel like the teams I work with for over a long period of time do it very, very well. So I don't want to point at like specific companies, but there are companies I've been working with for years, and they would easily fit in this call and be able to chat with us for an hour about all the stuff testing that you all could think of. Like, it's pretty amazing to me, the people that get it, like the way they approach work changes, like I was chatting with Dave Masters from Realtor.com on Friday, and he was a case study in the Testing Business Ideas book because I was just really impressed, and we could trace him doing this all the way back to Neo, a Neo project at Move.com. And so it's really amazing to see how like the people that get it and they start changing their working this way, they pull it through a different career, like different jobs, different companies over time. And I don't know if I could point to a specific company that's doing it super well, but I feel as if the companies that I'm coaching over time and the people I'm working with over time, like they can run with it in ways that I don't even anticipate. But I do think it really humbles you to say, I'm open to being wrong. And coming back to maybe Adam's question really early on was like, who is horrible at this or who doesn't want to do this or what the mistakes they make. It's not like they can't logistically go through the steps. It's more of a mindset thing. It's more of I don't really want to be wrong, so I'm not going to really do this work.
That's powerful, yeah. Because a lot of it, it comes from like the agile philosophy too, right? If you understand the values and principles, the details, you'll figure out, right? And so as long as you can wrap your head around this being wrong, test early, test cheap, you'll be fine. So I love it. That's a great concept. I'm gonna yield my time and just basically ask you a question and then give you a chance to do a plug. So the question is, who else do you think we should talk to? Who do you recommend we bring back on as a guest on the show?
Yeah, there are a lot of people doing cool stuff out there right now. I'm a fan of Andy Plantenberg. She and I used to work at Neo, and
Great.
I think she's probably a friend of the group, or at least some of you.
Who else?
Assumption has been validated, sir. Please move on to your next risky assumption. She was on 2 weeks ago.
Nailed it.
I missed that
Nailed
one. Dang,
I'll send you a link.
I didn't know.
Who else?
She is in the high critical, but not in the most unknown anymore. So
This is going to be a really awkward ending to the show where I just rattle off people and you're like, oh yeah, we've already had that person on.
Check. Ash, check. Yeah.
Have you had Craig and Brandy on yet?
Have not.
we haven't. We had them I ran an experimental sort of what problem we're talking with founders. We had Craig and Brandy on the sideshow. But no,
So I'm a huge fan
So-
of Craig and Brandy, Craig Elias.
yeah, I'll put that episode. I'll
Sweet.
replug that episode.
Awesome. Speaking of
Yeah.
plugs, then we'll hand it back to you, David. I did put a link to the Eventbrite in the chat here as well, but make sure anything else you're working on, anything else that you want to share, get a copy of Testing Business Ideas at your favorite bookstore.
I think something to look out for, which I haven't unveiled to anyone yet, is I'm working on a zombie project assessment. So it's almost
Nice.
ready. I've been testing it. Whereas we're talking about the symptom aware and the problem I'm solving at the beginning of the show and how do we help people become more aware of symptoms. I keep coming to these companies where we have a bunch of zombie projects going and they're not necessarily, they know it, but they haven't put words to it. So maybe that might come out maybe this week or next. That's something I'm pretty close to
Nice.
putting out there in the world.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, chatting. You're welcome back anytime. And yeah, this has been great. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you, David.
All right. See you next week.